So, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all attendees worldwide. And a special thank you for joining this Daring Cities session. My name is Anina Hartung, and I am an officer in the Resilient Development Team at the ICLEI World Secretariat. And I have the immense pleasure of facilitating today's session, which is titled AdaptFin, Closing the Financing Gap for Adaptation. Over the last month, there has been a notable theme across the Daring Cities virtual forum, where we have heard from cities showcasing exceptional leadership, a commitment to bold climate action, and a determination to raise resilience efforts in the face of climate challenges. However, we have also observed a need for global partnerships, whole of society, multi-level governance, and innovative finance to scale up adaptation efforts. And at the same time, it's also crucial that local governments, particularly in the global south, are equipped with tools and knowledge that enables them to access technical and financial assistance. So perfectly in line with this year's theme at Daring Cities, which is powering collective action to respond to the climate emergency, we're using this platform as an opportunity to further amplify critical learnings from the AdaptFin project. More specifically, for those that are not aware, the ICLEI World Secretariat partnered with UNDRR under the MCR 2030 initiative to pilot a training course in supporting local governments in financing climate adaptation projects. And so today we have the great pleasure of presenting just a snapshot of this tailor-made training to a more broader Daring Cities audience. And to provide a short and simple and sweet glimpse into this, we are joined by an excellent lineup of speakers who will be sharing their expertise with us today. So after setting the scene and providing a bit of background context, I will pass the floor to Mr. Jaume Marquez Colom, who will be speaking about the cost of inaction and highlighting the urban finance gap and recommendations to fill it. After his presentation, we will then pass the floor to Mr. David Hakome Polit, who will be holding a dialogue exchange with Mr. Sanjaya Bhatia about the role of capacity building and the challenge of balancing support for adaptation within limited financial resources. And then last but not least, we are delighted to share a video recording from the city of Makati, Philippines, who happens to be one of the cities who actually took part in the AdaptFin pilot training. And so our final speaker, Ms. Liza Vel Ramos, will be presenting the Makati experience as a case example of successful adaptation strategies and effective use of collaborative governance at the local level. And so after listening to today's session, we do hope that city-level actors will gain practical insights on how to navigate the complexities of adaptation finance, implement effective strategies, and leverage local experiences to drive impactful climate action. But before we hear from our speakers, we would first like to take this opportunity that we have to actually hear from you using a Slido poll that our events team will share in just a moment. And we are asking just 4 short questions to gauge your understanding about adaptation finance. And as you can see there, you can either scan the QR code that you see on the screen, or go to slido.com directly and write in AdaptFin. You can see that there on the screen presented. And so I'll just give you a few moments for everyone to join before we begin. And the first question that we have is very simple, and that is simply, where are you joining us from? And we'd love to see where our global audience is coming from. And I see we have already gotten a few responses there. We see South Africa, Makati is also present, Switzerland, See India, London, Germany as well, Shanghai, Bangladesh. That's wonderful. So it looks like we are very much widespread everywhere in terms of joining this session. So thank you so much for taking the time wherever you are to be joining us. Now I'm going to move on to the next question, and this is simply, what is the word that comes to mind for you when you think about adaptation finance? And just take a few moments here as well to wait for some of the answers to start trickling in. Okay. See, limited, helpful, habitat protection. Okay. Financing infrastructure, essential for closing the gap. Okay. Resilience, great responses. Challenging, yeah. Muddy. I like that. Vulnerable, local. Oh, okay. So I see resilience, NBS. Resilience is there big and bold. That seems to be a big a common answer amongst us. Okay, excellent. Then I would say we can move forward with the next question that we have. And this is, what do you consider to be the #1 challenge for local and regional governments in accessing climate finance for adaptation projects? And once again, we just take a few moments. Okay, let's see. Hashtag AdaptFin. No business model, transparency, expertise, packaging bankable projects. These are good responses. Capacity gaps, policy inadequacy, return on investment. These are great. For project implementation. All right, excellent. Thank you for those responses. And now finally, moving on to the last question that we have here. This is not a word cloud, but rather a poll coming from you. What do you believe local governments, local and regional governments need to access adaptation finance? So of the prompts that you see there, what do you think they need for this? Okay, we have a three-way tie. No, no, no. All of the above. Interesting. Okay. So it looks like, yeah, all of the above is tied with lack of local long-term planning. Okay, excellent, excellent. Nice to hear everyone's responses. I wish that we could spend more time unpacking all of this, but we do need to now jump back to the session. And to set the stage, I'd like to first provide a bit of a brief overview about where the global community currently stands and why increased investment in adaptation is so crucial. Next slide, please. So, despite the overwhelming, you could say, momentum to address the climate emergency, the reality is that this change is not happening fast enough, and the window for a smooth transition is closing much faster than, unfortunately, we can realize. And the extent to which current and future generations will experience an uncertain world does largely depend on the choices we make now and in the coming years. So this image that you see, it depicts the scenarios regarding differences in temperature depending on how high emissions are going forward. And according to the IPCC, in order to keep global warming well below 1.5 degrees Celsius, global greenhouse gas emissions will have to drop by over 50% by 2035 compared to current levels. Doing a quick math there, that is 11 years from now. Next slide, please. So one of the key takeaways from the recent IPCC report is that we will see more intense storms and flooding. And when we were conducting this AdaptFin pilot training with 10 global cities, we asked the cities to tell us what the main climate hazards were that were affecting the city, and how were they also feeling the impacts of climate change. And their responses do line up with the key takeaways of this recent report, which is that we will see more intense storms and flooding. And particularly flooding, as you can see from the results of the survey, was the most common answer. And unfortunately, this is a reality felt by many cities. Next slide, please. So in addition to an increase of storms and flooding, the global average temperature is increasing by 2023, is increasing, sorry. And in 2023, hundreds of millions of people around the world experience extreme heat. And each month from June through December set a global record for the respective month. And this is all just to say that the frequency and the magnitude of climate change related hazards are increasing, and their costs are as well. In 2019 alone, it was considered the costliest year for natural weather related disasters. And over the last 50 years, it is estimated that 3.6 trillion has been racked up due to losses. And so the longer that countries wait to respond, the greater the damage and cost to contain it. Unfortunately, extreme weather events resulting from climate change will only continue to escalate, and efforts to strikingly reduce greenhouse gas emissions are not happening anytime soon, which means that there is a great emphasis placed on adapting to this new reality. Next slide, please. So adaptation involves the ability of social and natural systems to confront dangerous phenomena, trends, and disturbances caused by climate change. And it entails maintaining essential functions, identity, and structure while retaining the capacity for adjustment, learning, and transformation. Various adaptation measures, as you can see there, can be implemented. Their potential varying over time and regions and populations from multiple factors. And some actions, such as tree planting in degraded areas, can serve a dual purpose, such as mitigating greenhouse gas emissions and reducing vulnerability to rainfall-induced landslides. And so adaptation strategies, they encompass disaster risk management, human development, institutional strengthening, poverty reduction, and land use planning, and social transformation and livelihood security. And their effectiveness, advantages, co-benefits, disadvantages, economic efficiency, and governance challenges of adaptation measures should be considered during implementation. We'll actually hear later on from Makati as an example of a city that is exemplifying this. Next slide, please. So at the same time, cities are at the forefront of adapting to this new reality because they are home to the majority of the world's population, and they serve as economic, social, and cultural hubs. In particular, unfortunately, the impacts of climate change are felt more acutely in urban areas where infrastructure, economies, and communities are concentrated. Which makes it all the more important that adaptation measures are incorporated in cities to enable them in thriving in a changing climate and protect the most vulnerable. Next slide, please. So in this context, climate change will exacerbate existing inequalities and conditions of poverty, particularly for disadvantaged populations based on gender, age, race, class, caste, indigenous status, and special abilities. And the number of people affected by disasters has increased in recent decades. And despite various sources of disturbance involved from different climate threats, the vulnerability of exposed populations will exacerbate by the effects of climate change. And next slide, please. Just to wrap that up, on that cheery note, I would now like to draw our attention to the next presentation, which will cover the urban finance gap and recommendations on how to address it. And for this, I would like to invite my colleague Jaume to the floor. Just as an introduction to Jaume, he is an officer in the Innovative Finance team at the ICLEI World Secretariat, and he works to support the management of the Transformative Actions Program, TAP project, and ICLEI's work and engagement in global initiatives in Europe, Africa, Middle East, and Asia. He holds a master's in global energy and climate policy from SOAS, University of London, and has a professional background in advocacy, project management, and climate change consultancy in Southeast Asian countries. And with that said, Jaume, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Anina. Hi, everyone. I believe we can move into the next slide. So here, I wanted to highlight that we have an uncertain certainty. It is certain that temperatures will rise. It is uncertain how much and by when. The latest studies, such as the IPCC report, indicate that estimates might be too conservative. Temperatures might be rising at a higher rate than expected due to exacerbated systematic effects. The rate of warming is uncertain, and how much global warming we will experience as well. So we have a lot at stake. If climate costs are over 50% of GDP by 2050, the fabric of the socioeconomic systems will not be able to sustain itself any longer. In this graph, as you can see, the damages at the percentage of GDP from 0 to 100% and the global warming temperatures. How this might be reached sooner or later, depending on the temperatures and the pathways that we are gonna be taking part in. Next slide, please. So here we are talking about an opportunity cost. So there's need for adaptation. The cost of adapting to climate change for developing countries is expected to increase by 140 to 300 billion US dollars per year by 2030. And current adaptation financing is only a fraction of what is needed. Therefore, we need to act now, and we need to act immediately with increased financing for adaptation. It is an urgent need. Next slide, please. So every dollar invested in risk reduction and prevention can save up to $15 in post-disaster recovery. Every dollar invested in making infrastructure resilient to disasters saves $4 in reconstruction. So we have a good business case here for investing at the moment, right now, in adaptation finance. Next slide, please. I also wanted to bring your attention to how different countries, different cities, different subnational governments are being affected by climate change in a different way. Here we have a graph of, in blue, there's the world 10-year average of annual economic damage caused by disasters in relation to their GDP. And in red, we have the example from Ecuador. As you can see, there is a trend, in an increasing trend over the years since the 1960s, but we can see that it varies on a case-by-case scenario. How catastrophes and weather-related events are affecting national economies will really vary. And although there is a trend, depending on the perils, the losses and damages are not always consistent. And we can see this in the next graph. Here we have a similar graph, but caused by droughts and next slide, please. We have here a similar graph caused by droughts in relation to global and, in the case, the Ecuadorian GDP. As you can see, in Ecuador is not really affected this much by droughts, whereas there's an increasing trend globally on drought catastrophes, drought events. However, if we move to the next slide, here we can see that by floods, Ecuador is more affected on a trend than the world average in terms of GDP. So this is just a brief example on how each city, each national government, each country is facing climate change in several different ways. But the need for adaptation is it's a commonality to all countries. So here, then I would like to go to the next slide into what when surveying the cities that took part in the AdaptFin pilot project, we asked what kind of support or assistance would be needed in order to receive adaptation finance. So how do we solve this problem? So we saw that there is a need for training or capacity building on adaptation finance, data and information on financial mechanisms, where to obtain the data on forecasting, and how to bring it into place, what are different projects that are happening at the moment, and how can they be replicated, tools or methods to apply those. And we also see that the technical assistance and guidance to develop these adaptation projects, as well as connection to financiers or partnerships, such as partnerships with the private sector, including public-private partnerships, and others were also needed. If we go then to the next slide. So we talked about the dangers that we have. We have an opportunity cost as well for climate adaptation. But what are the constraining factors and barriers to climate finance that local governments continue to face in mobilizing and accessing climate finance adaptation? It normally is due to the lack of technical, structural, and financial capacity for project identification and preparation. It can happen as well that there is a lack of full control over their own resources and fiscal autonomy, and there's a dependency between different levels of government. There is perhaps a lack of awareness of and capacity to utilize different sources and financial instruments, find different sources of funding or financing. And there is a lack of consistency in policy and enabling regulatory framework across the different cities and contexts. Next slide, please. So due to this, there's a financial need to finance on adaptation, and there's also the barriers to this finance. So therefore, we find that there's a climate finance gap. There's a demand between 4.5 to 5.4 trillion US dollars annually that are needed to be invested on urban infrastructure through 2050, and there is a need for more support for adaptation, with between 11 to 20 billion US dollars required annually by 2050 to be invested in adaptation. On the supply side, the global climate finance flows reached an estimate of only 1.3 trillion by in 2021-2022. That is less than a third of what is needed at the urban infrastructure. Annual urban climate investment stands right now at 384 billion only a year, and 5% of the tracked global climate finance flows were destined to adaptation between 2021 and 2022. And later on, we'll see a graph that will illustrate this. But let's move to the next slide. Here we see a big overview on how what is the landscape of climate finance. This graph is from the Climate Policy Initiative and illustrates the years 2021 to 2022. And in blue, you can see the public finance moving into several instruments and the uses of the climate finance. And in red, you can see the private finance, how it's flowing towards the different instruments, uses, and then sectors. And in this case here, I wanted to bring to your attention, if we move to the next slide, that adaptation, the types of activities that are used to finance adaptation, is only 63 trillion that is flowing into adaptation projects, which is around 5% of the total global climate finance flows. And you can see that for mitigation, there is 1,150 trillion US dollars that are being invested in mitigation projects. So there is a big unbalance on mitigation and adaptation financing. Then if we move to the next, and I believe my last slide, here we're talking about how to address the urban finance gap. So we identify there's a need for climate adaptation. There are some risks. There's also this finance gap and barriers to finance. So in order to address this, for national governments, multi-level governance and vertical integration is recommended to facilitate the interaction and the financing going into adaptation. That should be accompanied by an enabling institutional and regulatory environment. For local governments, it is really important to secure seed funding rather than waiting for a fully covered support for their own adaptation projects. Involve in city networks such as ICLEI and its partners and other partnerships in order to not only learn for other peers, but also get access to many of this data and information that is sometimes hard to get access to. Optimize its own resources, always within frameworks that include sustainability efforts and approaches towards adaptation. Aggregate projects, here not only projects in adaptation, but also holistic projects that include several sectors, and that by doing this aggregation exercise, you are bundling projects, making them bigger and more attractive to financiers later on to finance your own projects. And also, finally, green budgeting is important to to earmark already some of the budget that would go to these adaptation projects. And for international financiers from the supply side, here we would need an increase in volume and a share of climate investment with a focus on also concessional mechanisms. This is important. Adapt current operating models to scale up urban climate action through the adoption of programmatic approaches for sustainable project pipeline and finance development. And last but not least, direct and indirect investment to cities with the provision and of effective technical assistance. There's a need to support vertical and transversal cooperation between the levels of governments that we mentioned before and expand the local capacity building initiatives as indicated by the survey. Adapt to local language and currency. Oftentimes we see programs that are only in English and using internationally used currency and do not adapt to the local one, which by doing so we will facilitate the access to this financing, make climate finance knowledge, data and case studies more accessible for the cities to get access to be able to use them, and increase transparency processes and decentralization of urban investment, so climate cities can have easier and wider access to these sources. And with this, I conclude my presentation, and I'm very happy to give back the floor to you, Anina. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jame. Yeah, thank you so much for this extremely informative presentation, and also for unpacking some of these constraining barriers of climate finance gaps, and discussing as well this imbalance between adaptation and mitigation financing. Always good to have a bit of an illustration that's realistic about the landscape. In particular, I also appreciated in your recommendations slide there this need to support vertical and transversal cooperation between levels of government and expand local capacity building initiatives. Something that maybe we could call a bit of a food for thought, and perhaps delve a little bit deeper into with this next part of this session. But in any case, thank you once again so much for that presentation. Now moving forward to the next part, I would like to focus our attention on a dialogue exchange or fireside chat, if you will. And for this, I would like to introduce one of his speakers, and that would be Sanjaya Bhatia, who is the head of the Office for Northeast Asia and Global Education and Training Institute for Disaster Risk Reduction in Incheon, Republic of Korea, where he has actually guided the training of over 17,000 government officials globally. But before taking this position, Sanjaya worked as head of the International Recovery Platform Secretariat at Kobe, Japan, where he led the development of the guidance notes on recovery and a capacity building program for national and local governments. Earlier, he worked as the focal point for disaster resilient schools and hospitals with the World Bank, where he was instrumental in financing of projects on safe schools and hospitals. He's worked with the government of India, the World Bank, and the United Nations in the field of disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation for over 30 years, and he holds a degree in law and master's degree in public administration from New York University. And now I would also like to introduce David Hakome-Polit, who was formerly the Chief Resilience Officer and Metropolitan Director of the Resilience in Quito, Ecuador. And David currently works as the head of the Resilient Development Team at the ICLEI World Secretariat at the intersection of socioeconomic and spatial exclusion and the effects of extreme natural events. including the ones related to climate change. He aims to ensure access to essentials such as water, food, energy, transportation, and labor opportunities. In his words, the creation of livelihoods and the betterment of living conditions is a must. So, Sanjaya and David, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Anina, for this introduction, and already for you and Jaume for two great presentations. And I'm very glad and honored to be here with Sanjaya. And I think the best way to start this is that we connect with some of the points in the last slide that was presented by Jaume. And it's clear that we need a systemic approach. Local governments on their own are not going to be able to do it by themselves, depending on the scales, but also depending on the capacities, jurisdictions, and the level of decentralization. Local governments depend on national governments. However, we know that there are inadequate coordination efforts across different levels of government that hinder the capacity to access to financing needs. I wanted to ask you, as a global coordinator from MCR 2030, how does UNDRR see the importance of capacity building and initiatives like MCR 2030 to strengthen the coordination among these entities? Over to you.
Thank you so much for the question, David, and also thank you to the prior presenters for a very insightful presentation on the key issues, the challenges, and also to the participants for highlighting through the Mentimeter. So coordination is of course a big problem. I'll take you back to the midterm review of the Sendai framework, which happened last year in New York, and there we saw all the member states. So this was the national governments mostly, and they were also saying that coordination with local governments, building the capacity of local governments, enabling local governments to be able to deal with disaster risks and climate adaptation is a gap in the of 2030. So, and they have financial tools also. Also with the academia and with other stakeholders, civil society organizations, and so on. So it is a big challenge. Under the MCR 2030, this was started as a global initiative with a number of key partners, especially ICLE, who is also currently the global co-chair of the MCR 2030. The idea was to highlight some of these issues of coordination and to bring different stakeholders together on the same platform. So today, MCR 2030 has about 1,750 cities from around the world, plus over 30 national governments, and also about 310 private sector and academia partners. So it is trying to bring this, but then again, we don't have to just wait for the global initiatives. All cities need to reach out to their partners. So under the MCR 2030, we are also trying to promote capacity development through all the tools that the partners have. So for example, this AdaptFin tool, but there are other tools also which help local governments to do diagnostics, to understand the gaps, to convert those gaps into action plans, to prioritize those actions, and then convert them into bankable projects so they can access finance. So all of this capacity development needs to be well coordinated with all the stakeholders that I mentioned earlier, but also with the global financiers and the regional and local financiers.
Thank you very much, Sanjaya. And I think it's important to really consider that there is the need for a broader coordination with all the different stakeholders that you have in a country, and that can be allies to local governments. As a follow-up question, and also mentioned during the previous presentation, data is often cited as being crucial for adaptation finance at the local level because it enables precise targeting of resources, ensures effective implementation of adaptation strategies, and supports the monitoring and evaluation of outcomes to maximize impact. And this very last bit is quite important. Financiers, they want to see impact that is measurable so that they can understand how the either euros or dollars that they are spending are really creating change, right? But at the same time, a large percentage of the climate finance is not sufficiently transparent to be tracked to its end use. What are your thoughts about this? Over to you.
So I think, yeah, thank you. So I think regarding data, firstly, the way that local governments handle budgets, there need to be, there are taxonomies available and they need to access that. And these are easily available, but then again, through capacity development programs, perhaps they get more understandable. But these taxonomies help to identify where the money is going. So what qualifies as a climate adaptation project, what qualifies as a green project, and then you can, collect that data, or the cities and the national governments can collect that data. So having the correct and using the taxonomies that are available, that becomes very important. Secondly, data is of course overall important because if you can't measure it, how can you control it? So you need data on what are your losses, what are the risks you are facing, what are the losses that they are causing. Something like came out in the earlier presentation about how much GDP is being impacted. So at the city level, at the local government level, trying to see how much impact there is now and how much impact there is in the future. It can only come from the data. So that measuring and the collection of that data becomes important. But then there is a challenge because the data sits with different stakeholders. So some of the data might sit with the national government, some of the data might sit with public sector entities, which are again maybe run by the national government. And then some of the data may fall in the purview of private sector, for example, utilities, telecom, and so on. So, but there are good practices around the world where there have been data sharing agreements between national, local government and other partners. So those are the kind of things that need to be done. Another important point for data is there are some ISO standards also, like ISO 37123, which is the ISO standard for resilient cities. So this looks at data, like the normal set of data that a typical local government would need to manage their disaster risk reduction and climate adaptation issues. So again, that is something for cities and local governments to look into. And then lastly, I would say data, again, as you mentioned, that the financiers want to say where the money is going. So of course, the taxonomy will help. But even when you are making that project, the bankable project, you need the data to convince why you have taken certain projects, because you can't do everything at the same time. You're going to prioritize. So why have you prioritized one over the other? So again, the data becomes important. So this is very critical issue, and I think later Makati City might be able to reflect a little bit because they've done a good job on this.
Great. Thank you, Sanjaya. Then I would like to jump into another question right now related to data. However, also related to local realities. We know that sometimes data is just not available because there isn't any, but then connecting with these local realities and local leaders might be a way of opening the door to accessing more data and information. And at the end of the day, we know that when an event strikes, one of the first things that happen is that the lives of people and the livelihoods get disrupted. But we also know that funds reaching these really low levels has usually a limited impact because adaptation decisions fail to consider local realities and knowledge. And planning and design are often conducted at the national, international levels, or even sometimes they even sometimes stay at the local level and they don't come down to the very down to the community or neighborhood or barrio level. This type of funding requires a paradigm shift in how adaptation finance is accessed. Decisions are made and progress reported. What do you see as a blueprint for enabling impact-driven, locally led adaptation finance, which is also kind of like a very much needed and hot topic today? Over to you, Sanjaya.
Okay, yeah, thanks for this. So I think one of the key issues that UNDRR has been promoting both to national and local governments and to other stakeholders is to have risk-informed decision making. So all decision making should factor in the risks not only of today but also of the future because of the climate change, and for that again you need not only the past loss databases and damages and losses information, but you also need the projections for the future. So if these are integrated into the urban planning, for example, into the land use planning, into the local government budgets, then they would help to reduce the risk and increase the impact of the finance. So, for example, building a school in a floodplain next to the river, if the risk assessment is done, then it would be built at a higher level. It would be built, the plinth would be higher so that the floods will not impact the school, or maybe the school, it might be a decision taken to move it somewhere else. So that is also a good decision, depends on the local government. So having the risk information when planning and designing these kind of projects is very important. There's also, I think, at the national government level to the local government level, some empowerment is also required. So, for example, many countries need to look at, if it's feasible for them to bring in legislation that can allow local governments to access climate finance directly, because many places they aren't allowed. So, for example, many local governments are not permitted by the national government to invest in to issue green bonds or even to issue municipal bonds, because it might impact the national credit rating. So these are, but there are ways around it. There are good practices around the world where this is happening. So national and local governments have to work in partnership and see that how they can enable that. And then there's the role of the financiers also. And I was happy to see in the last presentation, a whole half the slide was just on the international financiers. But it's not just the international ones. There are a lot of private financiers in this space who can fund adaptation projects. But they also need to adapt. They need to have a dialogue or a conversation with the local governments and understand how they can make this financial flows possible.
Thank you, Sanjaya. I think we only have a couple of more minutes. Since we have you here, I would like just to ask for your thoughts on these two different processes, the loss and damage fund and the Santiago network. And just maybe you can give us kind of like a quick overview of the two, and how do you see them in the future as two possible opportunities, or if there are any relations between them. Over to you, Sanjaya.
Yeah, so kind of they are very much related, because the loss and damage fund is to provide financing to governments when the disasters have impacted and they are in the recovery phase. And the Santiago network is about the data. So again, having the data not only to inform your decision making, but also having the data to inform the recovery plans, let's say, or to understand how much damages and losses have occurred, which can also help to inform the future planning and the budgetary processes. So yeah, so they both have their own roles to play. But I would like to say one thing. Ultimately, all of us, I mean, we have the climate, we have the DRR, we have the Sendai, the Paris, and we have the SDGs. But ultimate objective is to achieve sustainability, to achieve sustainable development. So I hope that in 2030, when all these three agreements are coming to a close and the new ones are being finalized or negotiated, at that time we look at a convergence. All the stakeholders look at converging into one agreement, which covers the adaptation, the mitigation, and the risk reduction, and the sustainability all in one.
Thank you very much, Sanjaya. And I think you leave us with a very nice thought. I would just like to add to that besides having all the different agendas aligned, also that we make sure that they reach the most vulnerable on the ground, and then they help also support change at a national and international levels, how these resources flow. So thank you very much, Sanjaya, for your thoughts. Back to you, Anina.
Thank you.
Yes, so thank you for both of you. Also, just to add my thoughts there, thanks for outlining the importance of coordination among the different stakeholders, and even more broadly, academia, and especially the private sector, especially in the context of data and transparency, and showcasing the real impact of data that can be translated into bankable projects. I like what you said there, Sanjaya, that data is important. If you can't measure it, then how can you control it? And it was also said that some data lies within the national government, some public entities. So really the first step for developing projects sometimes with international finance could really just start at home on the ground level. A need for, you could say, broader organization with these stakeholders. So I think those are some great takeaways, and it also leads us beautifully to the next portion of this session, where we'll hear from the city of Makati. But before this, I hope you will join me in thanking Sanjaya and David for these invaluable insights that they have shared with us. So now, just briefly to mention, it's time for the video recording, which has wonderfully been put together by Liza Vel Ramos from the city of Makati. Unfortunately, she is not here with us live, but just a little bit of background about her. She works in the city of Makati for nearly 15 years. Having expertise in disaster risk reduction and management and climate change adaptation. Her extensive experience includes research, planning, project development, investment programming, policy crafting, and fostering strategic partnerships. And so for her intervention, she wanted to share with us today a video recording that would highlight the Makati experience. So please join me in watching this lovely video.
Good day to everybody. I am Lizaval Ramos and I'm going to present financing for hashtag Resilient Makati, Makati City's investment for a climate resilient future. First of all, we'd like to thank ICLE and of course UNDRR for always inviting Makati to showcase what we have been doing in climate and disaster resilience. And with that, we hope that with this presentation, the participants of this training or this seminar can actually learn from Makati. We have no formula for whatever status we have right now when it comes to climate and disaster resilience. But one thing is for sure, there's something that you can learn from our experience. There's something that you can learn from our challenges. And hopefully this presentation can give you what you need for your local governments and organizations. As much as possible, whenever we do our resilience assessment, understanding of our risks, the interventions that we have, and the gaps that we still need to address, we're doing it in a multi-sectoral, multi-stakeholder way. No? So we've been inviting different stakeholders, may they be non-government organizations, academic institutions, private sector, even our local utility providers. And that's where we are, very, very proud to say that because of this multi-stakeholder, multi-sectoral approach, we were able to really come up and create programs that are responsive to the needs of the city. And that really addresses the gaps based on the resilience assessment. And another takeaway, which is very much similar in the context of mainstreaming the RRM, is of course that concept or that understanding that resilience is really everybody's business, that the contribution of the private sector is really necessary in resilience building. So from that experience and from this over a decade of journey in resilience building and using the MCR tools and doing annual assessments, that's when we realize that we really cannot do it alone, and we need different stakeholders to help us achieve our resilience goal. The tool, when it was actually updated using the new 10 essentials after the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction has been enacted and published. So we used the new disaster resilience scorecard, and in 2017 we were able to again do our assessment, and if you will notice, it's still a decrease in rating, no? But does that mean that Makati has actually digressed from our resilience building journey? No, learning from here is that the more that we involve different stakeholders, the more perspectives that we get from various stakeholders, the more that we understand that there's still a lot more to do. So it's the whole process of resilience assessment and involving different stakeholders led us to developing a responsive disaster risk reduction and management priority programs. So aside from, of course, drainage infrastructure investment in climate change adaptation is just one of the many other possible interventions, because as we know, as what we've said, a city is a system of systems. So by just having an infrastructure intervention doesn't necessarily mean that we are already adapting to the best of our ability against climate change. And therefore, what I want to show with you is this particular slide, though it's not exhaustive of the list of programs and interventions that we have for climate change adaptation. But what I want to show is that when we do a particular intervention, we ensure the interconnectedness of other interventions, because that is also important. If you're working on the drainage improvement for infrastructure interventions, you also have other pre-disaster interventions like urban greening. In partnership with our barangays or the smallest political unit here in the Philippines, and even in partnership with private sector. In the case of one of the initiatives you can see on the slide, partnership with Boysen for park beautification. Boysen is a local paint company. And we've partnered with them, and if I'm not mistaken, it's not just park beautification, but the paint that was used, it's actually air pollution sensitive, or at least to lessen air pollution kind of paints. in our parks or major thoroughfares, no? So basically, that's urban greening. And then we also have initiatives for waterways management. Even if we do a lot of improvements in our drainage and our roads, and even if we do a lot of activities to manage our waterways, again, it's a transboundary concern. No, so coordination with neighboring cities and even regional government agencies who have jurisdiction on transboundary matters here in Metropolitan Manila are also some of the initiatives that we regularly do. So for waterways management, this is also in partnership with our barangays or the communities, no? So our barangays have their regular cleanup drives within their barangays. It's of course funded by their own funds, complementing the initiatives of the city for waterways management as well. And even initiatives from the private sector, particularly the utility providers, because here in the Philippines, it's privatized, no? Our water and power are privatized, and therefore we also need to collaborate and coordinate with our local utility providers, no? For these different interventions, may they be infrastructure and non-infrastructure interventions against climate change. But just like any other intervention, since these works are ongoing, no? There are still ongoing drainage improvement, continuous urban greening and waterways management initiatives. For some residual risks, due to flooding, no, we still have our end-to-end early warning system. So we also invest on end-to-end early warning system. So our idea is to make sure that the right information, the localized information from weather events are actually cascaded up to our community, down to the community level, through various means, so that their response intervention, may it be at the family level, household level, or community level, are informed by data and by science, no? The idea that I want to share on this particular slide is that one particular intervention is not enough for us to really achieve our climate goals. In our case, it's really more of leveraging on collaborative governance. Again, going back to that learning, over a decade worth of learning using the MCR tools of, involving and engaging as many stakeholders as possible. So it's collaborative governance for us for a climate adaptive Makati. These are the three key takeaways, no, from everything that I've said. These are just some of the takeaways that I want you to carry on. That first, our work on climate action, or our contribution for the Paris Agreement and the series of COPs, it requires a whole of society approach. I think I cannot emphasize this enough. The collaborative governance is very much important in this journey on climate initiatives or actions. And this requires a lot of trust and relationship building with different organizations and different stakeholders. It requires sustaining our efforts and our collaboration with them. It cannot be a one-time, big-time kind of thing. So it has to be, sustainable, and it has to build up from one area to another in order to be able to get everybody on board. And this is how we can actually develop responsive interventions. And that's very much important. Developing interventions, developing programs, developing projects for us to be able to source the financing that we need for our interventions, no? So it's not about just being, well, of course, we have to be innovative, we have to be resourceful, especially for local governments who do not have the financial capacity to support support their programs or projects from their own funds. We have to be innovative and resourceful in securing funds and in looking for potential financing opportunities. No? One thing that we can do is to really, undergo a program, a training, talk with your national government agencies, maybe try to research online possible training programs, maybe enroll or express your intent to be part of the AdaptFin training of a clay. to be able to, give you the platform to understand other mechanisms or other means of financing your climate initiatives. And to top all of this, both of these takeaways, we can only do if we have a very strong institution. If disaster risk governance is really at the core of everything that we do, because with strong institution comes strong creditworthiness, comes strong relationship, comes strong trust from different stakeholders, and strong institution also does not only mean a strong local chief executive or a strong head of agency. It also means investing on data, investing on science, investing on risk information. So just you can build your case, as I've said, build your context, build your projects to be responsive, and that will make your project easier to sift through the very complex process of securing financing from different financing institutions. And I think there's no better way to end this presentation but by, of course, quoting our very own Makati City Mayor, Mayor Marlene Abigail S. Binay, when she said that financing urban adaptation projects largely depend on local government's ability to mobilize revenues. Cities can mobilize finance for their investments through internal and external channels. For Makati, we have incorporated adaptation finance into our core administrative policies and allocated sufficient funds in our annual investment program. Mobilizing private capital, primarily through public-private partnerships, is essential for bridging adaptation financing gaps and implementing big-ticket projects. And that's coming directly from our very own Mayor Abby Binay. And hopefully you can learn something from this quote and from this presentation. And with that, thank you once again. Should you have further inquiries, I have here the contact information of our office. And I believe we also have here representatives from the city government of Makati from the different departments. I sincerely apologize if I cannot be with you during this event, but I hope that you learned from my presentation, and my colleagues here can actually give you some more thoughts and some more insights on how we're doing it here in Makati. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. And we, from our side, we would like to extend our heartfelt gratitude to Liza for her presentation. Even though she wasn't able to join us live at this session, we do appreciate her taking the time to record this video for us so that we could all learn and benefit from the Makati experience. Just a couple of quick thoughts as we were listening to this presentation. I really liked something that Liza had said about the more that we involve different stakeholders, the more perspectives that we get, and the more we understand that there's still a lot to do, which has, of course, driven Makati to emphasize this collaborative governance. And so the idea of ensuring this interconnectedness and bringing together different stakeholders to achieve climate goals is because it's not possible to do so in silos. And I would also say that this has been quite a resounding theme in today's session. So it's wonderful to hear from a city that embodies this message. So thank you so much, Liza, for sharing the Makati experience. And I do believe this brings us to the closing remarks. And I just wanted to, on behalf of all of us at ICLEI, thank each and every one of you for being a part of this session today. I know that we have driven a little bit over time there, but I hope you will agree with me when I say that this has been nothing short of inspiring and insightful, and that we can take this information that we have learned today and hopefully apply it maybe in our own work. So thank you so much to all of our invited speakers for being so generous and sharing their insightful presentations with us today. I would also like to thank our wonderful Daring Cities events team because they are the ones creating the magic behind the scenes. So thank you so much to them for making this happen. And also to our audience for participating and actively engaging, especially earlier with the Slido poll. And in line with the upcoming Daring Cities events, it would be wonderful to see all of you there at the next one, which is titled, as you can see there, Beyond the Bin, Circular Solutions for Urban Waste in Southeast Asian Cities. That is taking place 26th of September, and I think more information can be found in the chat box. So I would encourage our audience not to waste any time in registering for this interesting session. So once again, on behalf of all of us at ICLE, thank you very much and have a wonderful rest of your day.